hitting, and the team has won quite a bit with him there.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what's going to be needed, and ultimately they need. I think the Blue Jays are in a position here, and Keegan was talking about it yesterday, where you need to be aggressive and be greedy and be thinking of running away with the division. Don't just hold on with a two-game lead over the Yankees. Chase 93 wins, 94, 95 wins. Try to really secure your spot, and not only by winning the division, but maybe your top 2 seed in the American League, then you avoid the wild card round altogether. I mean, that's where Vladdy factors in. Like, everything just continues to move. The way you add another 2 or 3 wins to the win column is Guerrero can single-handedly do it, and Bichette can do it, and if you get Varsho back and Santander back, all of this, could be available to the Blue Jays, and if it all comes together, you're going to have a special, stretch run here through August and into September. All right, Week 7 of the CFL beginning tonight, and Chad Kelly's still not ready to return. It sounded like he's real close. The Argos are in Montreal. They're a massive underdog. I think a double-digit dog. I think 10.5 on FanDuel, I believe. Alouettes 3-2. They've off to a pretty good start. The East, seemingly like every other year, is more watered down than the West. Here's our CFL, NFL reporter and insider. Here's Dave Naylor. How you doing, Nail Gun?
Hey, Brian. You mentioned the West dominance over the East in the CFL. This has been one of these things that I always get asked about, like why? And I have no answer. I've tried to answer it a million times. There was a period in like the last 4 or 5 years where, like, for a year, remember when the Golden State Warriors were just rocking, like just steamrolling everybody? Like, there were complaints that the NBA had become non-competitive because of the Golden State Warriors, right? Around that time, for about a year and a half, the West had a higher win percentage against the East in the CFL than the Golden State Warriors did in the NBA.
Wow.
I can't, and I could tell you why Golden State had that win percentage. I can't tell you why CFL West did.
I'm not sure either, and yet you get to the Grey Cup, and the Argos would sneak in a win, and it would obviously, you get to a one-game playoff, and anything can happen. And even in the West, with that being the case, like the depth, it seems like Winnipeg has just been the pace car for so long. But you look at the Argos, and there's been a lot of discussion about how many guys they've lost, and especially on the defensive side of things. And they're 1-4. They're in tough. They're waiting for Kelly to return. As we said, the East, it does not appear as if anyone's going to run away with this. It's still possible. It's early in the season. But what do you think the Argos are thinking right now? Like, what is a reasonable expectation for them the rest of the way, and do you think they can get to a point in the season where they feel comfortable they can and will make the playoffs?
I think we're really on the Chad Kelly train here, and from my latest information at the start of the week was Chad Kelly was running Skelly, but he still wasn't running team drills, so I'm not sure it's like that close. It may still be a little while away, based on what he's doing in practice. And look, this is kind of deja vu for the Argos, right? Because they missed Kelly for half the season last year because of the suspension. But here's the difference. And Nick Arbuckle, basically was the guy last year like he has been this year. Here's the difference. Last year, their defense was playing pretty well, especially after the first month of the season. And it was also a scoring defense. They were getting like a pick six or a fumble recovery, forced fumble deep in territory. They're creating turnovers in short field. So there's a lot of complementary football that the defense was providing to pick up an offense that wasn't really in sync. Same thing on special teams. I mean, Janarian Grant was a machine last year, in terms of giving the Argos field position. So, the definition of complementary football is basically when one side of the ball is not doing its job, the other side will pick it up and compensate. They were getting that last year when Chad Kelly was out. They're not getting it this year. That's the difference between last year's Argos without Kelly and this year.
What about down there in Hamilton? Are you liking what you're seeing from their quarterback play and enough from their defense?
It's funny. The first few weeks of the season, everybody was jacked up to see what Hamilton would be like because they finished really strong last year. Bo Levi Mitchell had a huge second half. They go out and sign Kenny Lawler, who's maybe the best receiver in the league. And the first 2-3 weeks, it was like when's the show begin? Where are the fireworks? What is this? And the last 2 or 3 weeks, it's been a different show. I mean, Kenny Lawler is playing at such an exceptional level right now. I have to think of the last time we've seen a receiver in the CFL who's that dominant. And look, this guy was a big-time player in college. He played with Jared Goff at Cal, and he was a draft pick of the Seahawks, of course, former teammate of our friend Luke Wilson while he was with the Seahawks. And he's a guy who's had a lot of injuries, so he hasn't really put together that spectacular season. But the GM in Hamilton, Ted Gavaya, was the assistant GM in Winnipeg. So he knows Kenny Lawler. He knew what he was buying. He went out in the market, paid top of the value, and that's what they're getting. That's what they're getting from him. I mean, again, it's not like he's wide open. Like, this is a guy who's a contested catch guy. Like, he's a physical receiver. He will go vertical, and he will fight you for the football. That's what we've seen in him. And on the defensive side of the ball, Hamilton, their second overall pick in the draft this year was a guy out of Windsor, from the University of Windsor, named Devin Varasek. And he got a look-see in Indianapolis and was a little bit late for Ticat camp because he was kind of waiting to see if he gets signed in the NFL. But look, linebacker from U Sports to the CFL, especially middle linebacker, tends to be a very rare path. Like Mike O'Shea did it, 30 years ago, coming out of Guelph and was starting for the Ticats. But most U Sport linebackers end up as special teams players in the CFL, a lot of them. And then a lot of them don't really good. If they do get into starting roles, it's not going to be very quickly. Devin Varasek has started 3 games at middle linebacker for Hamilton, the last 3 games. They've won them all. He's, I believe, led them in tackles every one of those games, led all players in tackles, and has a pick 6. So this is a special player that is doing things that we don't see very often. So they're getting some presence on the offensive side of the ball, getting some presence on the defensive side of the ball. And I think people are feeling a lot better about the direction of the Ticats than they were the first couple weeks of the year.
Dave, you talked about knowing what you're buying, and I think the Calgary Stampeders would be pretty happy with what they got in Vernon Adams Jr. And of course, BC was in a bit of a bind last year. They had Rourke, they had Adams, and Adams moves on to Calgary. They're 4-1 now. What can you say about his play with that team this season?
I'll tell you, the Calgary Stampeders must be looking at the stars going, what are the chances that when we bottomed out, and we're ready to retool the roster and change a bunch of the coaching staff and begin that rebuilding process and look for our next guy, that Vernon Adams is available. 31 years old, seasoned, proven. I mean, if it was anybody else but Nathan Rourke that with the opportunity to go to BC, Vernon Adams would still be their quarterback. And he's not just, a dynamic player and a guy who can do all kinds of things at his position. He's also a guy who sets culture. Everywhere Vernon Adams has been, he's been a leader. He's a guy who understands this league and kind of how to conduct himself off-season, in-season. I remember talking to Jalen Philpott, one of the Philpott twins, who was a free agent last year after 3 years with Calgary, and I was talking to him about, the decision to go back to the Stamps after, they kind of bottomed out last year. And it was clear he'd spent a lot of conversations in the offseason with Vernon Adams. I mean, Vernon Adams arrived in Calgary and not only became the starting quarterback, but he became, the leader of the team to retain guys. And it's been dramatic. The other thing they did was, Calgary the worst record in the league last year. So you get the first overall pick. Okay, getting the first overall pick in the CFL is not like getting the first overall pick in the NFL. You're still probably picking a developmental player. You're probably still picking a guy who's not going to have an impact on your roster, till maybe late in his rookie year, maybe even year 2. Well, they took a guy named Damian Alford, who played most of his college career in Syracuse. He was at Utah last year, was hurt all year. He had, I think it was like 6 for 155 and 2 touchdowns. On the weekend. Second straight game, he's had a touchdown. He's a 6'5", 6'6" guy out of Montreal. He can high point the ball. He's got speed. We don't usually see rookie Canadian receivers, splash like this in their first 2 months in the league. So, there are a few things going right in Calgary, but definitely Vernon Adams. It's such a luxury for a rebuilding team to be able to go out and find a player like that right in the heart of his prime and start to build around him.
With Dave Naylor, and obviously the reason he was available